On the 10th of September 2023, I decided to play Nintendo DS and only Nintendo DS for 30 days straight, and this is what happened. It all started 2 years ago when I decided to do a 30-day Game Boy challenge. Playing only Game Boy games for 30 days straight on an original DMG Game Boy was such a ride of nostalgia and emotions I didn't expect. I decided to follow it up the following year with a 30-day Game Boy Advance challenge, equally a rollercoaster of memories and emotions, but in a totally different way. Jump forward to present day and I was getting that 30-day challenge urge again, but this time I wasn't sure if I should change it up. The Nintendo DS is the natural successor to the Game Boy Advance, however it provides a much more modern game experience, so might be too easy. Recently I've been enjoying the RG Nano a lot, a brilliant micro handheld that provides some great bite-sized fun. However, I haven't really played it for more than a 30-minute session, so a 30-day challenge with the RG Nano would be a true challenge. Once again I turned to you guys to help me decide, and honestly I was surprised with the outcome. I thought the RG Nano would win outright, but it was nearly neck and neck, with the DS just edging out the win. Sure, there were a lot of you that wanted to see if a 30-day RG Nano challenge was even possible, but I guess the nostalgia factor won again. The question was when to start. I didn't have any big game releases to plan for or any handheld reviews on the horizon, so I was pretty flexible. However, I was really enjoying playing Overwatch on my new Loki Max. I was honestly finding it quite difficult to tear myself away and jump back nearly 20 years in the world of gaming. That was until COVID hit. Up until now I've managed to avoid catching COVID despite it popping up around me quite a few times. During lockdown I was one of the few that needed to shield, and as things eased up I've always erred on the side of caution. However, it finally got to me, and on the 10th of September 2023 I called in sick at work, made myself a cup of tea and got cozy on the couch. I had one of those few times as a father of 3 to have a few hours to myself uninterrupted. The world of gaming was my oyster, but I was feeling pretty tired and lethargic and just didn't feel up to playing anything too strenuous. I just wanted something simple, fun and easy. It was at this point I realised the Nintendo DS 30-day challenge was starting today. I plucked up the energy to head to the game room to find my DS and charger. Unlike the other challenges, I had no plan really, no idea of what games I was going to play. But there was a cart already in the DS. I popped it out. It was Professor Layton and the Lost Future, a fun, relaxing game with some interesting puzzles. At least that's what I thought. I always wanted to play a Professor Layton game and even started one a couple of times, but never got more than an hour in. This would be a great start to the challenge. I went back downstairs and fired up Professor Layton, while also putting on Batman the Animated Series. What an amazing show. Back when I lived in Greece, Batman the Animated Series used to always be on Saturday mornings alongside X-Men. I used to love watching both, but I never really managed to watch them consistently, often having some important kid stuff to do. What I did see of Batman the Animated Series I loved, but growing up I always wanted to go back and watch all of the episodes from the start. And I finally started doing that today. I finally got around to actually playing a Professor Layton game, and I finally started watching Batman the Animated Series from the start. Both went hand in hand perfectly. The pace of Professor Layton gave me enough headroom to enjoy watching Batman the Animated Series, while also not being too distracted, and the high quality but short nature of the Batman episodes gave me plenty of time to jump between the two. In my rare moment of a few hours to myself, I felt like I was a kid again on Saturday mornings. After the first day I managed to get through what felt like quite a bit of the Lost Future. With Professor Layton being mostly a kid-focused game in its difficulty level, it's not too challenging, so I decided I would try to complete it before moving on to the next game. In the Game Boy Advance challenge there were a few games I wanted to complete but didn't really get around to completing any. This challenge would be different. I would complete a lot more games this time round, something I was excited about, but also a huge challenge in and of itself. Over the next few days I recovered from COVID while watching lots of Batman and playing lots of Professor Layton. As a matter of fact, I was enjoying The Lost Future so much I didn't even notice the time pass. 17 days later and I had finally completed The Lost Future. The problem was, the challenge was over halfway done and I'd only played one game. A game I really enjoyed, but that wasn't the point. The reason behind doing these challenges is to immerse myself in the game library of a console for a month, either for nostalgic reasons or for reasons of understanding how unique a certain console is. With the DMG it was purely nostalgia, reliving those memories I had growing up as a kid. With the Game Boy Advance and DS it is to explore a system I never really got to when they first came out. When the DS first came out in 2004 I just finished university, was looking for a job and mostly played PlayStation 2. The next generation of consoles were just around the corner as well, with the Xbox 360 releasing the following year. I didn't really know anybody with a DS at the time apart from my mate's girlfriend, and she always played Animal Crossing and Nintendogs. To me, the DS was more of a cutesy console with gimmicky games. It wasn't until years later when I started being interested in the Nintendo DS. At the time, I car shared to work with a good friend, Dan. During that time, I had some heavy nostalgia for Pokemon. Having not played any Pokemon games since the originals, I was craving that fun collecting RPG gameplay again. As a young adult though, new in my profession as a software engineer, I didn't really talk about it to anyone. I didn't talk about this secret obsession. I used to just read up on the new games and try to emulate Pokemon Ruby whenever I got the chance at home. But early one morning on the way to work, Dan started talking about the new Pokemon games and how he wanted to get a DS to play them. Little did I know at the time that Dan was a huge Pokemon fan and even played regularly in Pokemon card championships. Together we hatched a plan to both buy a DS and a copy of Pokemon each. Mine was Diamond, and we'd take turns playing on our drive into work. This was my first introduction to the DS and man did I love it. During the time I got an R4 card too, but I ended up in that situation where you have so many games but end up playing none of them due to overwhelming choice. I tried a bit of Lost in Blue, Civilization and The World Ends With You, but really only ever played Pokemon. Up until now it's only ever been Pokemon games I've played on the DS, which is kind of weird because the DS is home to one of my favourite genres of games, point and click style adventures. The DS is a beast for those rich story focused adventures, and the dual screen truly adds to the experience in a genius way, but more on that later. With Professor Layton completed and 17 days of the challenge passed already, it was time to try something totally different. Elite Beat Agents. Elite Beat Agents was recommended to me by my cousin Layton, the same guy from the 30-day Gameboy Advance challenge. Layton's taste in games has always been great, and unlike me, he has a good knowledge of the DS library, so I grabbed a copy of Elite Beat Agents and jumped right in. Elite Beat Agents is a really fun rhythm game with some great manga-inspired graphics and humour. It's a pretty straightforward game too that started off quite easy, so I hope to complete it in a couple of days. With any rhythm game, the key to it being enjoyable is a great selection of songs, and Elite Beat Agents doesn't fail, with an eclectic mix ranging from Jamiroquai, Cher and even Sum 41. You play the role of 3 agents that need to solve some crazy situations using the power of dance. Situations like an oil tycoon who lost all his money and wife, or the son of a CEO who has to ninja his way into a rival company to increase profits, or an athlete who falls sick the day before the big race. They're all quite fun and light-hearted, which is why I was really shocked with the Christmas themed challenge. The story of a little girl whose dad leaves for a business meeting on Christmas Eve, promising to be back in time for Christmas Day. Unfortunately though, he dies in an accident before he can return. During the level, you have to help the daughter and her mother remember all those special times with her dad, so she can feel like he's still there with her on Christmas. Trying to ease the pain of a lost parent really made this level pretty deep. The story really made you feel guilty if you failed, even with the fun anime graphics. A genuine surprise which certainly gave much more depth to Elite Beat Agents than I thought it would have. Over the next few days I battled through all of the songs in Elite Beat Agents. Boy was I wrong thinking this would be easy. Some of those last tracks are so difficult with hardly any room for error. Constantly repeating the later challenges meant I was walking around with these songs in my head all day long. If I wasn't in such a rush to move on to the next game, I probably would have taken a break. But by day 20, it was completed. Another great game ticked off. A couple of days prior, Agatha Christie's ABC Murders arrived, a cheap game that I thought would be some nice, easy fun. I've always been a fan of Agatha Christie's stories and murder mysteries, and with the DS being such a great point-and-click adventure machine, I thought this would be a great fit. Before we get into that though, I want to talk about the challenge so far. We've made it to the 20-day mark, and the thing that has surprised me the most is just how quickly it has gone. Being sucked into Professor Layton definitely made the time fly, but this time round it hasn't been difficult balancing family life too. In the 30-day Gameboy Advance challenge, it was really hard trying to resist the temptations to play PlayStation 5 or Switch with my kids. However, this time around the temptation hasn't really been there. My kids tend to go through phases of what they enjoy, and this time round they seem to be more interested in watching movies or reading. As much as I love to play video games with them, it's good to see them enjoying a range of activities and even playing with real world toys. And when we are playing video games, they're currently enjoying different things, which means a lot of the time we just hang out playing our own games. As much as I enjoy us all playing games together, it makes the challenge a lot easier for me. Plus, Spider-Man 2 was out soon, so I knew we'd be playing that all together. The difficulty this time round is having so many games I'm excited to play, with so little time. Just like now, I want to play ABC Murders, but I also want to play Mario Kart. I decided to play Mario Kart first, as I figured I could get through a full round of all the tracks pretty quickly. As expected, Mario Kart DS is a great game. You kind of know what you're getting with Mario Kart, and it's always good. But there's something about Mario Kart DS that I think makes it my favourite of all the Mario Kart games. The second screen really comes in handy. Displaying a full-sized map makes it really clear what is around you without having to look backwards. And it is brilliant at giving a clear location on where hazards are. It really helps when playing and elevates the game experience for me. I was really looking forward to ABC Murders, and it's a short game, so I decided to start playing that too. Unfortunately, ABC Murders did not live up to my expectations. Sure, it follows a good storyline, but it plays like a mediocre mobile game. It's really one-dimensional, the puzzles feel forced in, and the animation is basic at best. Plus, I think I'm all puzzled out after Professor Layton. I just really can't be bothered spending more than 5 minutes thinking up the answers, especially when the puzzles don't feel like a natural part of the story. Regardless, I've committed to completing as many games as possible, and over the next couple of days, I completed ABC Murders while taking breaks with Mario Kart, which I also completed. While playing through ABC Murders, I was craving a better story-based experience, something deeper and more enjoyable. I decided to research the best story-based games on the DS, and repeatedly Chrono Trigger came up. Chrono Trigger is a game I've always wanted to play, but I've never ever played more than the first 30 minutes. The main reason being that Chrono Trigger is pretty expensive here in the UK, about £80, which I'm definitely not comfortable paying. But I did find a loophole. The Japanese version, which has full English text, is only £30. And I also think the cover art looks cooler with the Japanese text. Chrono Trigger fortunately arrived the same day I completed ABC Murders. Good news and bad news, because that same day I absolutely wrecked my back. Long story short, I was deadlifting, which I'm pretty confident doing. However, on my final rep on the way down, I relaxed too early and my lower back engaged when it shouldn't have. One slip disc later, an important lesson learned, and I was in recovery mode again. Being injured or sick seems to be the theme of this challenge, but once again the DS was a welcome distraction to the pain, especially with a game as good as Chrono Trigger. With not a lot of time left in the challenge, only 8 days, I really wanted to give Chrono Trigger a good shot. There's something I've always loved about time traveling games. I don't know if it's because of watching Back to the Future as a kid, but I find the idea really fascinating and it opens up a lot of options in storytelling. I especially like the idea of visiting the same places at different times in the past or future, and Chrono Trigger uses this concept perfectly. Essentially, you're visiting the same few places over and over, which would normally create a lot of backtracking. But in Chrono Trigger, you visit those places in different times, which creates this multi-layered world where each visit is a fresh new experience, making for very exciting and fast-paced gameplay. Honestly, there is not a dull moment in Chrono Trigger, or any times where you're wandering around thinking what to do. You're always racing to the next location or time zone, knowing exactly what you're aiming for. And each time you visit a different time zone, it unlocks clues to previous time zones, making you excited to go back. For an RPG game, the action and story is fully packed and incredibly fast-paced. To be honest, I don't know if I've ever played an RPG that is literally all killer and no filler quite like this. And it's not just the time travel, even parts of the story where you find yourself in a trial having to answer for previous actions you've taken in the game make for such an in-depth and realistic experience. It's easy to overlook the quality of a game 30 years old, but like the story itself, Chrono Trigger is timeless. And if you travelled back to March the 11th, 1995, you would find a game that was so ahead of its time and introduced so many amazing gameplay elements that we simply take for granted today. Chrono Trigger absolutely filled the next 5 days of the challenge, and it was pure enjoyment. At 8 hours through this awesome 15-hour experience, I probably wasn't going to finish it before the end of the challenge, but I was going to give it a good shot. Meanwhile, on day 27, a brand new Taco Bell opened near us. Unlike the US, there are not that many Taco Bell here in the UK, and my son loved going the last time we were in the US. He's been eagerly awaiting the opening of our local branch, and we found out that on the opening day, they were giving out free tacos to the first people in the queue. I made my way down there at 11 AM and was about 8th in the queue. I had my trusty DS with me while I waited and got a couple of free tacos while I waited. Not a bad way to spend a Thursday morning. With just 4 full days left in the challenge, there was still so many games I had planned to play but hadn't even touched. Knowing I wouldn't complete Chrono Trigger before day 30, I decided to pause that and play some of the other games on my list. In the 30-day Gameboy Advance challenge, I was really impressed by Kim Possible, a really good fun side-scrolling platform and beat 'em up, and Kim Possible on the DS is even better, improving on the first in every way. It actually reminds me of one of my favourite games I played on the Vita, Counter-Spy, a really great side-scrolling stealth game. Hell's Kitchen was another game I loved. I've always been a Hell's Kitchen fan, and years ago I played a Hell's Kitchen iOS game. I was completely addicted to it. It was one of those cooking games where you have to cook and serve tables under time pressure, but it was one of the better ones. It was taken down from mobile stores a while ago and I always missed it. That's why I was excited to find out that this DS Hell's Kitchen game is the exact same one, something I hadn't realised until I started playing it, and I got addicted all over again. Guitar Hero? Now this was terrible. I was really excited to play this, especially with a fancy attachment, but it's just so bad. It's hard to use, difficult to get the angle right to play properly, and it's really painful on your wrist. I'll definitely be getting rid of this one. Duke Nukem Critical Mass is a game I got a while ago after seeing a video from On a Retro Tip. He was talking about Vita games that never made it to production. I love that sort of stuff as it always intrigues me, and Duke Nukem Critical Mass was on that list. It is, however, available on the DS and is meant to be one of the worst games on the system. Anyway, I'm usually a fan of games that other people don't like. I guess there's something about going in with low expectations, or maybe I like to find the good in video games. I thought this would be the case for Critical Mass, and the first 30 seconds I thought it might be like Impossible. Well, I was wrong. It is potentially the worst game I have ever played. They could have easily made a decent Contra clone, but the controls and the game feel are absolutely rubbish. Honestly, I don't know how a team of devs thought this was good, when an average solo indie dev could get the basics right that these guys messed up. On to GoldenEye next. This was a bit better. Besides the fact that I love James Bond games, they gave it a good shot at using the touchscreen for first-person shooter controls, but it was a bit too awkward for me. The button layout, however, worked a lot better. It's not a bad game and kind of what you'd expect from a first-person shooter on the DS. GeForce? Now this was really good fun, and a better spy game than GoldenEye. GeForce is a game I first played when my son picked it up a couple of years ago for the PS2, and I loved it. The DS version is just as good. The only issue is that the camera is a little bit too close to the character, but other than that, I love it just as much as I love the PS2 version. This one is definitely a hidden gem in my eyes. Mario vs Donkey Kong Miniland Mayhem. Wow, this is good, like so good. I've always loved all the previous Mario vs Donkey Kong games. They've always been in my top 3 games for the Game Boy and the Game Boy Advance. I thought this was just going to be more of the same awesome gameplay, but it's even better because it perfectly fits the DS and makes use of the touchscreen in a great way. Instead of controlling Mario, you're controlling the environment and changing it in a similar way to Lemmings. This is what I love about the DS. The completely new gameplay experiences the hardware can provide. On top of that, the soundtrack is superb. Remixing some of the classics from the Mario franchise is a genius and great nostalgic choice. This might just be my favourite game on the DS so far. Trauma Center? This is one of those classic DS titles I've always wanted to play for the longest time. This, as well as Ace Attorney, but I don't have time for both right now, so Trauma Center it is. And what a fantastic game. Again, making superb use of the stylus and touchscreen, something I'm really starting to appreciate about the DS. Just how well games are designed to bring new game ideas into play as opposed to just cramming in the use of a touchscreen. It genuinely makes for a great gameplay experience instead of being some gimmick. It also feels like this is going to have a pretty good story, which I really like. Tenchu, I hate to say, was a huge disappointment. I'm a massive fan of stealth games, and Tenchu in particular. I completed collecting all of the games a while ago, so I was really looking forward to Tenchu on the DS. But even from the start menu, it was a letdown. The graphics are really grainy and not nice to look at. When you start the levels, it feels like it has all the hallmarks of a great Tenchu game, and the story shows promise, but once you get into the gameplay, it just disappoints. The camera is way too limiting, a huge issue when it comes to stealth games, and the levels are totally lackluster. Mario 64 DS, the first time I actually get to play this classic on any console. I know, crazy right? But I was never fortunate enough to have access to an N64 growing up, and when I finally did, my backlog has been too overwhelming to get round to it. But now is the time, and I'm really excited about it too. I was surprised, however, that I started off playing as Yoshi, but as I understand it, this is a slightly different version to the original N64 game. Nevertheless, I really enjoyed finally getting around to a version of this classic, and you can really see how it's influenced all follow-on 3D Mario games. The one issue I did have though is because of the slower character movement compared to some other games, I found myself pushing really hard on the D-pad, which became a bit uncomfortable. This is where I think an analog stick would be really useful. On day 29, after having dabbled in a lot more games and got a bigger taste for the DS library, I decided to go back to playing Chrono Trigger, but decided to carry on playing a bit of Trauma Center as well in between. Day 30 and the last day of the challenge. It's become totally clear that there is no way I'll finish Chrono Trigger before the end of the day, but looking back on the challenge, I've had an absolutely amazing time. You could say this challenge was a lot easier than the others due to the fact that the DS has a much more modern game library, and that's true. I'm not going to lie and say it was anything like the original Game Boy Challenge or even the Game Boy Advance. The DS has much more quality of life benefits that make playing games far easier and engaging in the long term. The difficult part of this challenge was getting through as many games as I wanted. I completed a fair amount but also had to just dabble in many due to the time, including some of my favourite games I've ever played. Day 30 has come and I have no urgency, no need to put down the DS. I know I'm going to carry on playing again tomorrow and the day after. As a matter of fact, I know the DS is going to form a staple part of my gaming time from now on, to the point where I've even been inspired to start a book club kind of group with the Retro Refresh crew, where each month we play one of our favourite games. Chrono Trigger was the real inspiration behind this, as I've always known it was Tom from Do You Nerd's favourite game of all time, and I thought it would be cool if the Retro Refresh crew as a whole made a point to play each other's favourite games. As I'm still going through Chrono Trigger, this is our first game, and everyone else is really excited to jump in on the fun too. The 30-day DS challenge was amazing fun, and totally eye-opening to what a superb console the DS is, and just how well Nintendo implemented the touchscreen and stylus, to the point where I hope they bring more unique ideas like that to their future consoles. Something I feel like Nintendo have started to leave behind. I would absolutely love to see a new dual screen handheld at some point, but for every bit as straightforward as this challenge was, one thing is for certain: the next one won't be anywhere near as easy or comfortable.